was a tool to go into union negotiations and say, look, we're gonna just do PA 152 that essentially caps pretty much your health care, and it sort of forces you to go and look at it, every couple, 3 years as those costs go up.
Right.
For example, in Lance Cruise, because of this year, they sent us a thing and said, hey, we exceeded the hard cap this year, you have to pay whatever, and that was, not contractually bound, it was just, that's what happened.
Right. The point is that when we negotiated a contract, and PA 152 was one of the potential actions that we could take, we have to be able to say that in agreement for not enforcing or not accepting PA 152, we may have received concessions in other areas. So the employees say, look, here's a bucket of money, how do you want to split it up? Well, we'll agree to take some concessions in our pension, and we'll agree to take some concessions in some, say, our vacation, if you agree not to impose PA 152. So to come back at this now and say, well, hey, why don't we consider looking at PA 152, is kind of disingenuous if you've already negotiated an entire contract with that. That's all I'm saying. There are other savings that we've experienced within that contract that came as the result of agreeing to a package of health care that wasn't in compliance with PA 152. And there were savings that we've experienced in terms of renewals. So it isn't as simple as saying, wow, we just save $4,000 and we'd be done. I respect that. That's one way to look at it. I respectfully disagree that there are more costs and savings associated with this decision than just that number. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, we have a motion by Mr. Capro with support by Mr. Tominello to opt out of PA 152 for 2016. Mr. Witt, will you please take the roll call?
Yes, Mr. Capro?
Yes.
Mr. Tominello?
Yes.
Mr. Batante?
Yes.
Mr. Brado?
Yes.
Mr. York?
No.
Mr. Witt, yes. Mr. Verkowski?
Yes, thank you, Board. Next on our agenda is item F2, adopting a resolution to place a township millage proposal on the March 8th, 2016 ballot to levy 6.35 mils for fire services and 1.65 mils for police services for a 2-year period. Now, board members, the current police and fire millage will expire in 2016. So it's important to understand we have to take some action to come up with some sort of a millage question to put before the voters for what to do beyond 2016. At the November 30th Fire Services Committee workshop, the committee unanimously recommended that we outsource the dispatch and work towards staffing of 30 line personnel. Excuse me, we're currently at 25 line personnel, and by line personnel, when we talk about the total number of personnel employed by our fire department, the line personnel are those employees qualified and able to respond to fire or EMS type calls. We have historically maintained 27 line personnel. Our current millage rate of 5.5435, which for 16 is rolled back to 5.5025, is insufficient to fund the fire department at 25 personnel. Currently, although we've discussed that for 2016 we have a $98,000 deficit, we have to recognize the fact that we have not, during the last, I guess really since 11, put into the OPEB account or contributed to an equipment reserve. And certainly there is an equipment replacement schedule. So $98,000 isn't the total deficit within that fire department. There are really two major components. One is the cost to maintain, and then the second is for lack of a better word, the cost to put money in the bank, because we currently have a handful, I guess of the 25 employees, all 25 are still eligible for retiree health care. No new hire will receive retiree health care. So there's a need to have more than just that $98,000 hole plugged. During the analysis done by the Fire Services Committee, and there is an attached financial analysis that was prepared, that analysis suggested about 6.5 mils to fund 30 line personnel based on a proposed retirement schedule of one firefighter per year. There are a lot of reasons to believe that that retirement rate may occur more rapidly than the rate of one per year. As an example, in the next about year and a half, there are 12 individuals that are eligible for retirement. To say that all 12 of those would only decide to retire at the rate of one per year would mean that the last guy out would have worked 32 years, and that's simply not likely. The point is that the financial analysis that's attached to the agenda item is conservative by its nature. It's assuming a slower rate of retirements. The first couple of retirements will result in a retirement of officers that don't have to be filled based on some of the concessions that we were able to get in the last 312 arbitration. And even as those firefighters move up into some of the officer positions, we're talking about senior firefighters that are moving into an officer position being replaced by entry-level firefighters with tiered benefits that over a period of time will result in lower costs. No retiree health care, no longevity, reduced pension multipliers, and so forth. Point being that the retirement and replacement of these personnel will lead to short-term as well as substantial long-term savings for the township. I'm proposing a millage rate of 6.35 mils for fire services for 2017 and 18. And I propose that we work with the firefighters union to form a plan to outsource dispatch and agree to hires based on retirements to cover the 0.15 mil difference between 6.35 and 6.5. 1.65 mils is the amount needed to fund police services based on our contract and our taxable value. So we have a cost to provide police services, 1.445 million. We anticipate a revenue from 41B of approximately $30,000 based on historical. And we take that amount and divide that by our current anticipated taxable value. So 1.65 mils is anticipated to provide the cost to provide the two 24-hour officers that we currently have. So there's a question then, there's two questions. One is, we have to ask the voters to approve a police millage, and number two, we have to approve or ask the voters to approve some sort of a fire millage. I don't like excuse me, I do not like asking the voters to approve an increase in the millage rate. However, it's important to understand how we got to this question in the first place. So there's two components to this issue before us. One is a financial component, and the other is a service component. Since from 2009 to 2014, we lost 19.8%, or about $204 million in taxable value. Since that point, we've had an increase in the taxable value at 1.3%, and we anticipate 2.5% moving forward to 2016. So we dropped 20%, we're back almost 4%. At that current rate, just to get back to the taxable value that we had in 2009, it'll take 9 years. So 9 years from now, if on an average of 1.9%, if we average this out, 1.9% increase over the next 9 years, so in 2025, we'd be back to the level of taxable value that we were in 2009. Now, obviously, we can't predict inflation. It could be greater, it could be less. It could be more than 9 years or less than 9 years. In 2009, we levied 4.8 mills that generated $5.15 million. So our fire millage was $5.15 million in 2009. In 2014, our base millage was 5 mills. That generated $4.13 million. So there, from 4.8 mills to 5 mills, an increase of 0.2 mills, we lost $1 million in revenue because of the drop or the change in taxable value. To a certain extent, that's good news for the taxpayers. During that time, the amount that everybody was paying roughly dropped 20%. Their tax bill went down 20%. We're still down 16% in terms of revenue on of taxable value from where we were in 2009. 0.81 mils would be an average, a rounded off number of what this increase of 6.35 would amount to. It's a 14.5% increase over our current fire millage. So right now we're at 5.54. If you knock it down, we're actually at 5.50 with the Headley rollback. So it's a 14.5% increase. If you own a $100,000 home, that increase would cost you $41 a year. $150,000 home, $61. If you live in own a $200,000 home, that increase would be $81. And if you're in a $250,000 home, it's $101. So that's the cost. So to give this board and the residents some perspective. Clinton Township, their total police and fire millage is 14.19 mils. If you add up Chesterfield Township's police and fire, it's 8.24. Shelby Township's police and fire millage is 8.26. Now, each of those communities have their own dedicated police department. It's important also to understand when we talk about police and fire services that the very things that make fire service challenging for Harrison Township are some of the things that make police protection less challenging. So I'll give an example. Two of the larger communities, waterfront communities in Harrison Township would be Venice Shores and the Huron Point subdivision. Nice homes. I guess if I were a thief, it would be attractive to me to go to those homes. The flip side is I've got one way in and one way out to those homes for a rather long distance. So if somebody calls and says, hey, there was a guy in a red Escort that just busted my windows out and stole something, that guy is taking a big chance that before he can possibly get out of here, he's got a pretty narrow road that he has to drive down. But that remote location is exactly what can make fire services challenging, because in order to provide EMS protection, I've got to leave from a station, drive to a remote location, and then from that point, I don't get to continue on my way towards, say, a hospital or a clinic where I can take this person. I've got to drive all the way back out, so the time that it takes to provide that EMS service is challenging. Likewise, during the workshop, we talked about the ability to draw from a 360-degree radius for things like mutual aid or automatic aid, or the ability to place an ambulance in the center of the township with the understanding that, say, that private ambulance provider knows that they can travel 360 degrees to respond to a need if there's a call in another community. We don't have that. We have 75% of our border defined by either Selfridge Air Base or Lake St. Clair, and we also have to contend with the limits that the Clinton River gives us. So that makes it challenging for fire, but it makes it a little bit easier to provide police protection. But in either case, we're faced with a challenge. And I recognize that through this process, we've had a lot of discussion about what level of service we should provide. So what we're talking about here is giving the voters the opportunity to decide what level of service they want. We compiled, for lack of a better word, a group of experts. Some had fire experience, some had legal experience, some had financial experience, and so forth, municipal experience. And we tried to ask all the questions we could about our fire service. We asked, are there ways we can streamline what we do? I don't remember the exact number, but somewhere in the 90% range in terms of the cost of our department is wages and benefits. So short of being able to change that component, the vast majority of the budget, we do not have the ability to revise that. Through concessions, through negotiations, and through a lengthy, expensive, and messy Act 312 arbitration, we've taken two swings at trying to address that contract. And at a bare minimum, we could certainly say that in addition to concessions, we received substantial concessions in the second tier or new hire of employees. And knowing that we're facing 12 employees out of a total of 25 that are eligible for retirement in a year and a half, we're likely to see in the very near few years a turnover in the age and in the cost to provide fire services. But in the short term, unfortunately, we're not funding for retiree health care. We're not building an equipment reserve. And at the current taxable value without a millage increase, we can't even continue to maintain where we're at right now. We're darn near $400,000 short. So the question is, what level of services do our residents want? And it's ultimately their decision. So the question for this board is, what question do we put on the ballot? I believe it's most responsible to ask this question of the voters as soon as possible. The next election that we can ask the question is March 8th. March 8th is a presidential primary, and because of the fact that there is not a Democratic or Republican incumbent, it's reasonable to think that a large percent of those people in our township that vote are likely to be at the polls in March. So this isn't an attempt to try to do some sort of an off election. It's the next one we can do. There's already a cost to do the election. There's already people who are planning, presidential election is pretty significant. There's likely to be a large percent of the voters that are gonna go to the polls. And at this point, we get the chance to ask them, is this the level? This is what the experts recommended that we do. Do you agree, and are you willing to pay to have this level of service? If they say no, then we know that we're shooting too high, and we've got to come back with another question. We've got an opportunity in August and again in November. If they say yes, then we know we've done our homework, this is what we think, this is the best that we can provide. The residents say, yep, we're willing to pay that for this level of protection. That's the decision. We're not, by putting this question on the ballot, we as a board, or each individual board member isn't saying, I'll vote for or against this millage, but we're saying, this is what we propose to the voters to be able to maintain or improve the level of service, depending on how you look at it, over a period of time, to the residents. This millage rate will allow the following. It would allow us to outsource dispatch, which would take one additional line personnel on every shift and make them available to respond. So if we've got 8 guys in the station, we've got 9 guys on duty, 8 guys are in the station, I've got 8 guys that can respond. I don't have 7 with 1 that has to stay back. We can utilize technology through Comtech, which is admittedly growing, but it's improving daily, to be able to improve those response times. And if this millage were to pass, we can return the department to 27 line personnel. So we're talking about ultimately 1 more that's able to respond. In addition, we can close the deficit, we can fund for OPEB, which is a responsibility, and we can begin to fund for equipment reserve. And then as retirements occur, and we are able to bring in new hires at a rate that's lower than what an outgoing firefighter might be, we have the ability to grow the department perhaps as high as 30 personnel, although we can't promise when we do it. We've proposed a schedule to the firefighters of how to get there. So that is the question before you. To the extent that I can, I tried to give you that information. I know we spend an awful lot of time in the Fire Services Committee, and the Fire Services Committee themselves spend a lot of time talking about that. So this board has had the opportunity to hear some of the arguments for staffing, for response time, so on and so forth, for the ability to respond to more than 1, 2 events at a time. So I didn't go over those things. The question really before us is a millage question, and what do we put before the voters? There's one other point that needs to be addressed. May 1st of every year is ultimately when the new roll comes out. Basically, when we say this is the assessed value of properties in the township, and this is the new taxable value. So March 1st, we tell every property owner, this is what we've assessed your property at. During the month of March, they have the ability to appeal that, and by May 1st, I believe it is, I'm pretty sure it might be May 15, or is it May 1? I don't know. Either way, May is when that point occurs. If we ask the voters to approve a millage in March, between March and May, there'll be a rollback. We'll be affected potentially by a rollback, and then we'd be affected again by a rollback. So in order for us to legitimately ask the voters to contribute 6.35 and 1.65 mills, we know that in advance we have to ask for a millage rate that's greater because it could potentially be rolled back. We don't know how much it's going to be rolled back because we don't know what that number is going to be in May. We know that it's going to go up. Assessed value we know is going up. I think By one estimate, some property values are increasing at a rate of 20%. But that isn't what the taxable value is gonna go up, that's gonna be determined by, a factor associated with the rate of inflation. So whatever that increase is, may have a rollback effect. So if we ask for 8 mills in March, there's a good chance we won't even be able to assess 8 mills in 2017 and in 2018. So we're forced to ask for a number greater than 8 mills. So with what we saw as a rollback, we had about, I think it was, I don't remember the estimate, but I think it was 0.6 mills total that rolled back from 15 to 16. So we could have 1.2, or 0.12, 0.15, somewhere in that range. So the proposal is an 8.2 millage rate, but we would specifically ask for that millage rate with the intent of assessing 6.35 and 1.65 mills for fire and police respectively. So, I know it's a mouthful, but we spent a little bit of time talking about this already. The decision before us is what millage question to put forward and what millage rate to do. So there is a resolution that's attached, but it's a proposal to increase by 1.014 mills for 2 years, up to an 8.2 millage rate to support the general fund, to support and fund the operations for police, fire, and general operations, because we used to have a general. That's broken down to be 6.35 mils for fire, 1.65 mils for police, and 0 mils for general operations. And I'll just ask, Mr. Huth, just making sure, the question is an 8.2 millage rate, but then further we define that by 2 numbers that add up to 8, and I'm wondering if those individual numbers experience the rollback, or if it's only the 8.2 that's subject to the rollback.
It is the 8.2, but my thought on this is just that we consider the motion language to change it from motion to adopt the resolution to motion to adopt a resolution. In the past, we've tweaked it and double-checked the numbers after the board's taken some action. So what you have before you is something similar to what it would look like. I'd like to brainstorm with Adam and Carol and the county to make sure that we have those numbers right for this.
Right, and the motion specifically spells out, if it's this board's pleasure, 6.35 mils for fire and 1.65 mils for police.
And that's the essence of what your action is tonight, correct?
Okay.
Those 2 numbers should equal 8.2.
No, they should really equal 8, because what I think the board's doing is trying to,
But you're assuming a rollback, and we don't know what that is.
Right.
That gets assigned later, so you would say, whatever, 6.45 and 1.75, just as an example, and then once you get that rollback, both of those numbers would roll back to some other number.
Well,
That's the way we tax it.
Right, that was the
I
question.
mean, you would lose, I can tell you right now, you would lose 0.2 mils. Because I would not have necessarily authority to tax it. When you look at this, it becomes a problem.
Well, that's,
I
I mean, that becomes a problem.
when Mr. Huth and I were reviewing it today, we looked at what had been done in the past, and what we had done was, our previous millage was, the way it was authorized by this board was 6.6876. And sub down in the language, what we said was up to 6.67, and we split out very clearly, the amount for police and amount for fire. And then when we experienced the rollback based on the 4029 is applied to that top line number, not the individual levies. If it's a separate millage, like the half mill for police, because it's separated out as a separate millage, it experiences that rollback separately.
Mr. York, I will say on this, I agree with you that it needs to be a good look at that issue. And I think one of the issues I've had is we haven't tried to accomplish what we are tonight since I've been working with this community. So I would say I know what the board's intention is. If it passes this motion tonight, I'd like to work with Adam to tweak this resolution so we get to those numbers, 1.65 and 6.35.
So if we make a motion to adopt a resolution placing, we're defining the three variables. Number one, it's a 2-year millage. Number two, 6.35 for fire. And number three, 1.65 for police. And that ultimate tweaking is subject to whatever we could do so that we can truly, I mean, all other things being equal, that's what we wish to accomplish. We may have to ask for a number that's greater in order to avoid the penalty associated with the Headley rollback.
I agree with that.
So to go back on the history, I made this original motion for the 6.6876 way back when in 2005.
Okay.
But the issue there was because we wanted to call it a renewal, I had to increase it by 1/100th of a thing or something, right?
Yeah.
Remember that?
I
To
do,
call it a
yeah.
renewal, and then we wanted to cap it at the 6.67. That's why we put the 6.67 down at the bottom.
Right, 'cause
And that's the way it's been for 100 years, or whatever, 11 years. But that's why that's 6.876, and then down below, it's capped at 6.67.
yeah.
Because we wanted to specifically call it a renewal.
Yep, I agree.
Because we
It's-
went through a long string of millage increases that, you know, didn't pass. And the board ended up having to do a PA 33 in, what was it, '03?
So the only thing, it sounds like you're gonna work on the proposal, but I think the only thing I'd like to see is, I think we really need to say what people are paying now for police and what the proposed is, and what people now are paying for fire and what the proposed is. They need to be able to see the difference.
Right.
And we,
That's not necessarily ballot language.
Well,
That-
why not?
and we have the total difference on
Yeah.
there. I mean, we did
But
include
the whole
that.
thing is so you have a lot of people that don't listen to the meetings, that don't come here. When they go to the ballot, they wanna know what they're voting on.
Understood.
You don't tell them exactly how much from this to this,
I got you.
okay?
Right. So, but my question though, and I think I'll refer to that to Mr. Huth, there's one component of writing ballot language. There's another component of going through the process of explaining to voters, answering those
Absolutely.
questions,
Absolutely.
going through that educational process. So I jumped the gun in saying that I'm not sure that we could do that. I think I'd refer to Mr. Huth to say, do we have that option to include, for lack of a better word, education in the millage question?
Well, I think if you're fair, I mean, you can't be unfair in terms of parties on both sides, but you could. I mean, for example, and I'm just off the top of my head, 6.35 is gonna be allocated to fire. What is it now? It would be 5.83.
5.5435.
So what we
That
could
to
do is,
this,
we
in-
could maybe
with an
put in
increase
parentheses
of-
currently at 5.835, which is absolute fair.
Okay.
Yeah, I
good.
think that's reasonable.
Well, that's not entirely true because we have it broke out right now.
Well, whatever that number
We have
is,
a
we need
fire
to figure it
5
out.
mil, and then we have an additional ½ mil temporary millage.
Right. So,
That was
so you need to figure
specifically
it out.
targeted as temporary. I mean,
They-
it's all
they're all
gonna be
expired.
semantics at the end of the day, and we'll get into
But-
that.
but
I
in a
think,
people
I think
wanna
what
know.
essentially what matters to
But-
people is whether there were two questions or not.
Is this an increase?
They're paying 5.5 and change for for fire. That doesn't matter whether it was one question or two questions. I understand. I think it should be just
Needs to
one
be as
flat
simple as
number.
possible.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Well,
it's a
it-
fair comparison.
So
The
we're
residents
agreeing
don't
that
wanna
the,
hear all the semantics, as simple as possible.
but we're
what I
not,
wanna know.
right now, we don't have to decide the ballot language, right?
No.
Right now, we're
Well,
here.
no, we
Well,
pretty much.
I would
Oh,
want
do-
I would
okay.
want pretty clear guidance outside of what Mr. Huth was referring to is we want guidance as far as what you want to see in there, but we might have to tweak the 8.2 as regarding the Headley rollback.
So for example, I think the clerk and the attorney would want to know what Mr. Tominello asked for because they wouldn't have assumed that. But we're talking about, here's a resolution that says it's 2 years, 6.35 and 1.65. That's the question. But if you say, you know what, I think it's fair that if the person that just shows up at the ballot and reads the language and that's the sum total of research that they put into it, can we give them current numbers? I think that's a fair question to ask. And if Mr. Hu says we can include it, that's good. But that's the kind of information we want to give them now because we do not have the opportunity to come back to this. We have a handful of days before this must be done.
Tomorrow at 4 o'clock.
right, and in place.
So
To you though, right?
To me.
That's
To
what I
you.
would be looking for with the board concurrence.
Yeah, and I don't think that's, I don't
Yeah, I
think
think
that's
we
an
should- we should add
unreasonable
that.
request.
Good idea.
Okay, now we have not made a motion, and so we're modifying what we might potentially do, and I'm okay with that discussion, that this board has typically engaged in some deliberation outside of a motion, but at some point,
Mr. Vickers, let me ask this as well. I mean, because I've seen it handled both ways. This is a very big question. In many instances, before the motion even gets made, we allow for comment.
well, we can do that, but that isn't necessary. The issue is, we make a motion, and we open the floor for public
Well,
comment, and then we vote. We don't take action without
Of
public
course,
comment.
but we've done it in reverse as well.
Usually for an item that's different than this. If that's the pleasure of this board,
No.
I don't, I'm not opposed to it, but the
Okay.
point is that it's 10:30. I'm certain we'll get public comment on this, and I don't know if making a motion or not is gonna change it. If this board isn't willing to make a motion, I'm not gonna take public comment, and we're not gonna
Okay.
ask the voters in
Understood.
March.
Understood. Okay.
Okay, so I've got, at least proposed as a modification, revise a motion to adopt the resolution to motion to adopt a resolution. And then in addition, at the end, I've added, and list current millage rates, in the ballot question.
You couldn't put that in the motion, I understand the direction, so it's not in the motion, we're gonna make these changes you suggest.
So do you believe you don't
I
feel
don't
that
think
it's necessary? Okay. I don't know if there's other things, questions the board has, or if there's a willingness on the part of this board to make a motion at this point, and then subsequently open the floor for public comment.
Mr. Bekest, since I served on that fire assessment committee, and I'm willing to say to our residents that I'm in agreement with their findings, I'm willing to make a motion to adopt a resolution placing the two-year millage question on the ballot for March 8th, 2016, asking for 6.35 mils for fire services and 1.65 mils for police services.
All right, we have a motion by Mr. Batanti. Is there support?
Support.
Support by Mr. Brado. Certainly, there's still an opportunity for this board to comment.
I'd like to comment,
Okay.
if I may.
Whole bunch.
Well, I'm just saying, before we open up the floor for public
Okay.
comment. Yeah.
Public safety and financial stability of the township are the most important responsibilities of this board. This motion before us covers both of those areas. My role on the Fire Services Committee was to listen to the experts, to ask questions, and to apply common sense to what I learned there. I wanted to help assure our residents that there was thoughtful and thorough examination of fire department operations before we made a recommendation for the millage. In addition to serving on that fire assessment committee, I met several times with our firefighters to try to learn more about department operations and about their concerns. Prior to serving on the committee, I had certain notions about what changes we might be able to make to the fire department, in essence, to save money. But I have to admit that those were based on some very high-level conversations and weren't really based in a lot of analysis. The committee meetings, along with the input that I received directly from the firefighters, leads me to believe that the millage proposal and the associated plan is the best short-term resolution for the township. I say short-term because I think everybody pretty much agrees that there could be some merit in a regional consolidation of fire services. But that study is in process and is going to take considerable time to evaluate and even longer to potentially implement if we can do that. So for now, I hope that the board and the residents will support this plan.
Mr. Witt, would you mind moderating to get some extra comment from board members?
And Mr. York, you said you had.
So, just to the millage question, it says, I just heard, once again, we're saying something and we're doing another. What level of service do the people want? So when you put it out there that we're doing this millage and we'll see what service the people want, why are you bundling it? If in fact you wanted to do that, you would unbundle that. You would say, you know, I need whatever X amount of dollars, say whatever this $5.2 million is, and then take out that extra and say this is the additional. If you want 3 more men, whatever that might be. But what we're doing is we're just bundling it 8.2, and you know, I can hear the campaign now. Oh, if we don't approve this, then everybody's gonna, you know, you're not gonna have fire service, you're not gonna have ambulance. I can see it all now, because that's what always happens in this. But Mr. Batanti mentioned temporary, right? So I'll go back, and Mr. Batanti wasn't on the board at this time.
I didn't say temporary, I said the best short-term
Short-term.
solution.
Now,
Right.
now, the residents have heard short-term, temporary from this board before. And that was on May 13th of 2013, and I'll just rerun history so everybody remembers. We had that night, we did the 6.67 renewal millage rate. And then following that, we got into a discussion on, this is the actual minutes. There was further board discussion on the temporary, let me say that again, the temporary fire millage to supplement the fire department. And at that time, the board wanted to do an extra half mil, and all the comments were, to get us through the hump, the property values, we heard these property values comments. And at the time, I had one specific issue. I said, it's never gonna be temporary. The minute that we do that half mil, because people are politicians, they never give it back to you. That's the way it happens. And we sit here tonight and, oh, you're only paying 5.5 mils, so it's really only 0.8. No, it's really a 1.3 mil increase because we said it was a temporary. And as a matter of fact, people that remember that night, I remember Mr. Swiatkowski at the end of that lambasting me because he said in year 3, Mr. York, you're wrong. In year 3, we're not going to have to collect the whole $0.5 mil. And I said, we'll see what happens. Mr. Verkest that night, who and the vote on that was Adam, Ken, and I voted no on that. Mr. Verkest that night was pushing for a ramp down, starting at 0.5, 0.4, 0.3, something like that. Ken, I went and watched the.
Yeah, it wasn't
Ken,
0.5. It was
I'm
7, 5, and 3.
Okay, a ramp down. I
But
stand corrected on the numbers.
And I wasn't pushing for that, just so that you understand. I proposed that as an option, but what I said ultimately was that there's no sense in asking the voters for a millage increase when we don't know what the number is, when we haven't gone through our steps to do whatever we can to reduce the cost. That's what I
really
said
not my
vehemently.
point. My point.
Well, I understand,
my-
but I don't wish for you to speak for me.
I'm not
I won't
speaking
speak
for
for
you.
you. You told me what I was pushing
Please.
for, so that's wrong.
Please, I would love that. I was really just saying that it was a ramp down. Doesn't matter what the numbers were. But the simple fact was that night, we heard the same nonsense, that this is a $0.5 mil temporary. But the simple fact is, at the end of the day, this board didn't do what they said they were gonna do and lower the costs anywhere. That's a fact. Once you give people money, government, they never give it back, and they don't wanna go look at the expenses. And one of our concerns at the time was that we were going into negotiations with the fire department, and at the time only having 5 mils, we could really go into arbitration and say, we're really broke, but giving that extra 0.5 mils really hurt us at the arbitration, because now we had some extra money. So I'm gonna say this. We're hearing that the fire department's gonna do the dispatch. We don't know that. We haven't done negotiations. We haven't talked to the fire department. We don't know what they're gonna do. But we do have a contract that's expiring. So to go ahead and get this money at 8.2 without having a fire contract is outrageous. You're gonna go into, if the good citizens give us an extra an additional to what we are paying now, $800,000, how do you think we're gonna go into arbitration? Huh? We're gonna have a pot full of money, and I'll tell you, it ain't going to OPEB, it's not going to replace equipment, it's not gonna go to replace, machinery. Yeah, we'll have to fight and we'll have to argue that, because that's what we do. And the fire union obviously is gonna do their job. They're gonna say, oh, we want to, you know, whatever, 4% raise, and we're gonna have the money. We will completely lose any type of argument that we don't have any money at that rate. So I would recommend that we sit down with the fire union, get a contract in place, and I know that there's a lot of distrust. I think that, I see him back there. I think Andy would tell you that I've always been pretty straight up if I tell you something. You can, you gotta say that. We get a fire contract, then we can move this budget and this millage into what our true costs are and negotiate with the people and say, look, and I do believe that the fire union on this, because I do sit with the fire union president on the pension, I think we both agree that we need OPEB. I think everybody would agree we need pension. We need to get those numbers, then back that into a millage. But if we just leave this as a pool, if anybody thinks that arbitration isn't gonna be a nightmare for us, you'd be mistaken.
Well, I take great exception to the statement that you made that we haven't cut costs. I would say that of the 25 personnel that we have, they're operating 2 less personnel. I would say being 2 firefighters short of what the staffing has been for at least a decade, I think those folks would take exception, our current firefighters. I think the cuts that the firefighters experienced in arbitration would lead them to say that they disagree that there haven't been cuts. It was messy, it was difficult. We used every tool that was available to us by law to experience cuts. And in 2011, we had a concessionary contract. I think the retirees that right now have a certain level of angst about their health care would probably disagree with you when you say we haven't taken cuts. We just talked about how between the fire and the general and the water and sewer, we're seeing a net savings of over $500,000 per year in retiree health care. I do believe some of those retirees would say, well, if you weren't cutting, then give me my health care back that I used to have and spend another $500,000. So I don't think it's fair for us to say that we're here today and we haven't addressed every significant line item that we can, not the least of which is the contract for employment. Now,
I wasn't
we will-
really done talking, but
Well,
if
I'm
you'd
sorry,
like
you
to
paused.
speak, go ahead.
Well, clearly I do like to speak, so.
I know
got
you
that
do, go
covered.
ahead, I got till, as long as you want.
Right. So we've had concessionary contracts twice. We've taken cuts to retiree health care. At some point, no matter what we do, we have to bring that revenue component back to a level that we can provide a basic level of service to our residents. We do not have enough revenue currently to be able to fund OPEB, to be able to fund equipment replacement, and to even have 27 personnel. So we can talk all we want about negotiations. We currently have a contract that has the effects of concessions and an Act 312 arbitration, and we still, with 5.54 mils, can't cover the budget. So how could we possibly say, well, we just need to step back and do nothing? We need to bring to the voters a realistic number. 5.54, based on our current taxable value and the limit to its growth, will never be able to fund fire services as our residents have known them for decades. So we can certainly say we want to reduce the level of service, and then we can talk about a number lower than 6.35, but we cannot continue to provide that service. And my point to all of this is, I don't know that I'm in a position where I have the right to tell the voters, here's the only number I'm gonna propose on the ballot for you to pay for fire services.
But that's what
And-
you're doing, that's
Hold
my
on,
point.
I'm speaking now.
That's my point.
I'm speaking now. Here's the only number that you have to choose, and this number will result in a reduction of service. I don't know that it's my right to tell the residents they have to take a reduction in service. I need to go back to them and say, this is the service that we have determined is through the process of research with experts, this is gonna get you to where you need to be today, and this is the number. Now, I trust the voters. If they come back and say, you know what, we're not comfortable with that, well, then I know I've asked the question. I've got 2 more shots to say, all right, well, let's look at another number.
So I think it's fundamentally a question of this. What is the responsibility of the board? And it's just my interpretation is the responsibility of the board is to present to the people a plan that protects public safety, right? And after listening to experts, asking questions, I believe that that's what this plan is. Now, if our residents decide that's too expensive, then we will have to do something else. But I don't think what we're saying here is that, well, we took a $500,000 and we never gave it back. The economy is not allowing that. And I think that's I view it as our obligation to make a recommendation to the residents as to what the proper level of service that's been advised to us is. I sat and I listened to experts. We had, I don't know if Mr. Verkest indicated, we have 2 fire chiefs that live in the township.
For
that-
neighboring municipalities.
From neighboring municipalities. We had our own fire chief. We have members of the fire department. We had experts from SEMCOG. And I heard somebody say earlier, well, what do you think those experts are going to tell you? Well, here's what I think. I think that I'm a rational person that can apply common sense. I listened to what the experts said, and I think we turned that into a recommendation for the community. I think that's our obligation. If the community decides that that's not what they want, then we'll do something else. But I think it's our obligation to present a recommendation that we as a board feel is in the best interest of public safety.
And I think and I could be wrong on this, but I remember when we implemented this, or asked for this millage increase originally.
The $500,000?
I remember a resident saying, you're not asking for enough.
Well, we didn't know.
Right,
Yeah,
and
we-
that
we
was,
were-
and that
we
was
were
our
asking-
objection. We don't know what the number
We
is.
And
were
we said, well,
estimating.
we're not gonna ask for
At
too
least that
much,
was my
we're gonna ask
objection.
We were
for,
trying
you
to
know.
estimate, right.
Exactly, we don't wanna
We
ask
knew it
for
wasn't
too
gonna be
much.
enough, we just,
Right.
said it was gonna get us through the
But
hard
that
times.
was, my point though, is that people knew back then, we're probably not asking for enough money. And we all knew that, but we didn't wanna ask for a lot more money than we needed, because that wouldn't have been right either.
Well, we didn't do our
So-
due diligence, so we just,
Right.
We couldn't have. We couldn't have known how negotiations and arbitration would
exactly,
turn out.
so we didn't have all the
Right.
facts or the numbers to come up with a solid
Right.
amount.
But in the end, we have to put a question forward. We have to choose a number. We don't have the option of not asking the question of the voters.
Right.
We have to choose some question to ask, and in the end, I truly trust the voters to be able to make that decision for themselves. That's ultimately the decision that we have. So when you choose a number, I'm telling you right now, don't choose 5.5, because 5.5 isn't gonna get there. We already know that. We're not saving for equipment, we're not saving for OPEB, and we're 100,000 in the hole. 5.5 doesn't get near the revenue that we used to get 6 years ago.
And we were just, there were very critical comments about being in the hole in the fire department, right? Very critical comments.
Right.
And what we can't, I spoke to the chief earlier, I mean, it's not just a matter of, well, let's just run with 5 less people and save the money. There's a point of diminishing returns. It's not the difference between paying 6.5 mils and nothing, right? At some point, you've diminished your service to the point where the amount that you're spending is not getting you the proper levels of service, and we need to consider that. Nor is it protecting our firefighters.
Or our residents.
Exactly.
So this is a prime example of what I'm talking about. This fire department's been 27 people, long since 97, long before I was here. But at that time, it doesn't matter, 94, 97, 98, doesn't really matter. 2004, it's 27 people. The argument has always been with the firemen, and I've had my share with Mr. Share and everything, coming to my office, trust me, that our firemen, they want 5 mils, and we do so much more than everybody else, and I buy that. They do a lot of value add stuff. And the simple fact is, when you look at the comparables, we pay our men very, very well. They get paid very, very well. But the trade-off is that we have a higher average cost per fireman, but we have less men. That's the trade-off. It's always the trade-off. So if you want to have more men, it's not an issue of safety. If you want to have more men, you just end up lowering your cost per man. I can hire 50 guys. if I pay him,
not an
instead of paying people, whatever, I don't know, we have the costs here, $87,000 on average. If we lower that cost to Detroit, which is 52,000, think about how many men I can hire.
Right, that's not an
What-
option.
but-
is it?
what plan do you
but no,
propose to
that's what
lower
I'm
that
saying.
cost per
So-
man?
So what I'm saying is, when you talk about safety and this and that, it's always been my understanding from my conversations that we run lean because our guys do more, they get paid a higher amount. That's all I'm saying. If you go to 30, well, you know, maybe.
Well,
we
they are
need to
getting
look
paid
at-
less,
at-
right? In the future, in the next contracts, they
plan-
are being paid.
But they're not. That's not the way it works. You will only have a reduction for 3 years, and then they ramp up to the same price as the same person that we have. Correct? Right?
Their
Right?
pension
No, the
benefits are
legacy
the same.
costs are completely
But
different.
legacy.
It's not a 3-year, it's not a 3-year salary range, number one. There's no longevity beyond that. There's no retiree health care. There's a reduced multiplier. All of those things are factors on the total cost.
But you're making it sound like your actual salary, you're only gonna have that ramp up period that it's smaller. You're gonna be right back to where you are. You're gonna have this time period where
I
your
haven't
costs-
never said salary.
Your
It's a
costs are gonna
5-year
go down.
period.
Your costs are gonna go down, and then every year they're gonna go back up 20% to where you were in year one. Now,
They don't
they
go
did give up.
20%.
Well, sure, on a 5-year, 20% every year from the current guy to the lowest guy's salary, that will ramp up to 20%
Okay.
to 0. Now, they don't get longevity, but that's a long-term item. We're not gonna see any savings from a retiree health care or any of that right off the bat. The simple fact is our wage is gonna drop for a time period for 5 years, and it's gonna go up, you know, to that, back to the thing, because we're not changing, other than changing 2 sergeants. We don't have a third tier where people aren't getting 10% paramedic license and all of those add-ons that add $15,000 or $10,000 to $15,000 to that salary. That's my point. So we're not, I mean, we seem to be going down this road where we think we're gonna have these savings, but it's gonna be short-term. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, do you think a new hire is gonna cost the same, more, or less than a current
That would be
firefighter?
less, Ken, for 5 years.
For 5 years? No, for
Yes.
the entire duration
For
of
the
their employment.
duration of the employee.
Look, if you wanna talk, we are so far underfunded on our pension, it doesn't matter, okay? The simple fact is that you're gonna receive on your wages, lowering, and then it's gonna go right back. It's that simple. But you know, like I say all the time, the 0.5 mils, you know, said it was temporary, I told you it wasn't. We sit here tonight, obviously it's not.
It's a
know.
2-year plan, right? This is a 2-year request.
So I will say this, 8.2 mils is not a 2-year request. Once we go to 8.2 mils, it'll be 8.2 mils for the next 20 years. There'll be nobody that says, oh, let's lower it down. This is not temporary. Let's not mince words.
I didn't say it was temporary, I said it was
Okay.
2 years.
It can't be temporary. The whole point is if we
It's
didn't
2
lose
years.
20% in a 5-year period, we wouldn't be talking about 8 mils, we'd be talking about some other number.
And quite
But I
frankly-
can't go back and
Look,
undo the
look,
drop
look,
in
look,
20%
look,
of taxable
I
value.
think everybody knows I hate taxes. I
Who
think
loves
I
them?
think a 1.53 mil increase is crazy. Have at it.
Where do you say 1.5?
Go sell it to the citizens. Have at it.
This
Have
isn't a
fun.
question of selling, this is a
Have
question of
fun.
doing the due diligence and proposing to
Have
the
fun.
voters.
I can see us in this perpetual thing of not getting a millage. You know, if you want to ramp it up, do a 0.7 or something reasonable.
But what is that
And then
fund?
do another one 2 years from now, 0.5.
Explain
and
to the
give-
residents what that funds.
And give yourself a
What service does that
chance.
deliver?
It doesn't
This
meet
is
the
a- this
plan
is
that
a
was
well-
set
That's
forth.
fine, that's fine.
No, but
Then
you
we
can't
went
explain
over
what
this
that
for
means.
months.
So it's irrelevant.
Why 0.7? Why not 0.5? Why not lower it? I hate taxes too, that'd be
Well,
even
this is
better.
what I can tell you, Adam. If you really want to play the game, we'll play the
No,
game.
I want
I
alternatives,
I
not
need
complaints.
I need 5.50 mils to fund our budget for 2016. That is Glenn's number.
No, that's the rollback number, that's
That,
what the
that's the
voters
number.
have
That's
approved.
the number. You're asking right now for $800,000 more, essentially, than what we're required in 2016, and I'll even give you, you know, a little bit more for 2017 when this comes in.
Okay.
But it's still gonna be a number greater than, say, $500,000 in excess
So now at five
over
point.
your current budget.
Understood. So at 5.50,
that's all I'm saying.
we have a $100,000 deficit. We are not saving for equipment replacement, and we're not funding OPEB. So are you proposing we should just ask the voters to
Well,
approve
Ken,
5.50?
from 2004 to 2008, guess what? In the time when I keep saying this, when we took over, we funded for all that. We gave the fire department a $2.53 million fund balance. We did it all. You
Right,
just
but
have
you
to
didn't
do-
experience a
you
20%
you-
drop in
you
taxable
just have to
value.
do
You
it,
experienced
Ken.
a growth
You just
in
have to
taxable
do
value.
it, Ken.
Oh, God.
You just have to do it, Ken.
Mr. Supervisor, at this time, this conversation is unfruitful without any other alternatives, and I don't.
But that's what I'm
please open the
saying. Go
floor to
ahead and
public
vote.
comment.
I'm
All right.
good.
Well, we've got to open the floor.
I'm
to public
good.
I'll
Are there
agree,
any other
I'll
board-
agree to open the floor for
Go
public
sell
comment.
it.
All right, good.
It's gonna be a hard sell.
Bill Serva, resident. First off, I'd like to say that I commented from the floor because I figured there wasn't going to be any public comment, and I thought I threw something out that might be helpful. That said, I was also up here, and I pointed out, Mr. Verkest, that you should tell the public the truth, and that next year's budget is not going to just be 98,000, and now I'm looking here, and you have 98,000 deficit. I assume that's an actual hard currency, but then it says in here that you also need, bear with me for a second till I find it. It's, oh, here it is. 98,000 plus 200,000 for OPEC, 100,000 for equipment reserve. That comes up to 400,000. That's closer to the 500,000 that I threw out there. But I was gonna come up here and give the same numbers. I'm looking at the increase according to the budget. It's around $255,000 for the police. And .807 is approximately $800,000 in round numbers. That leaves about $550,000 surplus for the fire department. I agree with Mr. Verkest. What is the incentive for the fire department to change the status quo if you give them enough money to function the way they are? I agree that we need a certain level of service. Has anybody ever targeted that? I've been here a long time, and you may remember when we operated with 6 sheriffs. And I was at a meeting at one of the fire departments, one of the firefighters, I believe he's sitting behind me now, at his home, and Mr. Hackle was invited there, and he was asked a question by a friend of mine. This group wanted to voluntarily pay for 10 deputies when we didn't have to. Mr. Hackle was asked, if we don't do this, are you going to continue to supply the same level? Because we were actually getting, according to Mr. Hackle, the equivalent of 10. He said, as long as the commission funds my department the way they do, I'm going to continue to put the same amount of deputies in Harrison Township. But he also stated at that time that according to some statistics, we should have a 30-man department. Now, that's 3 times as much as we have now. Does that mean that we're running very unsafe now? The same could be said for the firemen. What I've heard for the firemen is that it's unsafe for them to be on a truck in a major fire with only 6 men on that truck. That may be the case. I'm not a firefighter. I can't speak to that. I will say this. Back 20 years ago, I was one of 500 people that stood up for the fire department on an Act 33. I was the only one. I got booed. This room and that room were filled. And I was afraid that we were going to dismantle this township, and that's the reason I was in favor of it. I've always been in favor of any employee looking out for their family first. I do not blame the fire department for getting whatever they can. That's their job. They're supposed to look out for their families, just like all of us do. It's your job to try to keep things in check. I don't know what the solution is, but I do know this. There's 27 men, and only 12 of them are firefighters. If I'm wrong by 1 or 2, I don't know, maybe the department could be restructured. It seems like there's too many chiefs and not enough Indians. Put some of them people out on the trucks and you can have 8 men on there without increasing. But going back to this budget, you said that all it would take is 98,000 to balance next year's budget. I agree with Darren. I've got the budget in my hand here. It says that rollback would be 5.5025 for raising $5,202,410, and Glenn says that's enough money. Now, of course, I understand that's not properly funding the pension fund. It's not properly funding equipment expenditures, but we've been down this road before. I was here when the chief, two or three chiefs ago, convinced the board to start putting money away, and there was over $2 million. That money should have been earmarked for equipment. And then some hard choices would have had to been made 4 or 5 years ago. But what happened was that money was converted to run the department and everyday expenditures. I don't know what the answer is. I do know this. There's other communities in Macomb County that have similar sized departments, and they run on half the money we do. How do they do that? I don't know. For one thing, they don't have EMS. To my knowledge, since I've lived here, I've never heard of anyone dying in a fire. I could be corrected behind me if that's not the case. But since we've been operating with a 25-man department, has anyone lost their life in a structure fire? Basically, we're running an EMS service. There was about 2,000 runs last year, and 95% of those runs are EMS runs. You know, when I moved into this community, we operated with a volunteer fire department with some full-timers and some volunteers. Maybe it's time to look at that model again and get rid of EMS and make them just firefighters. I don't know what the answer, but I do know this. You people haven't looked at any other options. You just say we have to have it, and for status quo, we have to have this.
Mr. Servil, the timer went off several minutes ago. If you could, please summarize your comments. I know there's others that would like to make a public comment as well.
I'm fine, thank you.
Thank you.
Dean Smith, Riverdale Street. Just by a couple notes. I've been in township for 17 years. When I came in here 17 years ago, I couldn't believe the fire millage and what we pay. So I'm still here 17 years later. I don't think I've seen one house fire down on the point, the one way in, one way out. I pay, total tax bill for Harrison Township is about $7,068. Of that, $1,241.41 is fire. That's 17% of my tax bill goes to the fire department. As somebody said earlier, most of the runs are EMS, not fire related. If this level of choice, right? We're talking about level of choice. Give me a choice, give me a number, I'll vote 5, 6, or 7, right? Give me a level of choice. I just want a choice. You know, I pay 5% for police. Police are in their car, traveling in the township 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The fire guys sit in the place doing I don't know what. But they're not out there protecting us in one way, but they are protecting us against a fire. But I haven't seen it. So with the news millage, I go up to 19%. My fire still stays right around 5%. So why don't we split these things up and give us a little level of choice? You know, if it's 5% renewal or 5.5, put it there. If that comes back 5.5, we'll have to cut the fire department. The will of the people, right? If it's 6, the will of the people. If it's 7, the will of the people. If maybe I want more police around town. I think that's, for me, police is more safe. Why don't we add another mill or two on the police so we get more deputies? Why don't we try to do this a little different way instead of just, 8.3 mills or whatever. Let's have an a la carte. Maybe it's 5. Thanks.
Thank you.
Jim Sunstock, 31698 San Juan. Just so everybody knows, I did attend all the fire commission meetings, all of them. And just so you know, I disagree with some of the things that have been said here tonight. The first meeting I attended, I walked in and one of the guys, one of the supposed experts, was talking about the fact that, hey, let's get this over with. We'll just put a millage rate out and we'll hold the citizens hostage and they'll have to vote it, otherwise they won't have fire service. And that was the guy, the lawyer from Macomb County that lives in the township. And he was that way the rest of the time he was there. So don't give me this, we listen to the experts. I listen to the experts too. Let's talk about that. Nowhere, when you formed this committee, you said you were gonna go in and take a look at how the fire department was operated, including whether or not we needed a secretary that we're paying $60,000 or $70,000 for. That word was never mentioned the whole time I was there. That was never discussed the whole time I was there. And yet, up here at the board, you said that you were gonna discuss it, and if maybe we might have to get rid of that person. Not a thing was said about it. You sit there and talk about the fact that we need the ambulance service. Okay, if you're gonna talk about an ambulance service, did you go out and did you ask the people from MedStar to come in and make a presentation to the group of experts? No, all the group of experts all sat there and said, well, this is what they're gonna say. This is what we're surrounded, we're on a point, we're this, we're that. They're not gonna put somebody in here. Nobody, not one person on that fire committee asked to have the experts, MedStar, come in and talk to us. Because you guys already had your minds made up. Darren said it when you formed the committee. This is just to provide cover. And now what the cover is you're coming back and telling everybody we need 30 people. Well, wait a minute. We need 30 people. Who said that? Oh, the experts. The experts are all firefighter related. I asked to be on that committee, but you guys didn't want somebody that was going to be questioning things. I brought to you a couple things today about the administration costs. That never got, well, it did get mentioned once. And Ken came out with his little response, and okay, we'll just leave that in there, because that's another $110,000 we get for free in the township budget. You're sitting there, you're talking about raising a millage to do 30 people when we have historically always went with 27. And now we're operating at 25. We have the capability to make some cuts. You could have made some cuts, and you didn't talk about them. The experts said this. Well, I'm telling you what, the experts ain't going to be able to go out and carry your water when you got to go talk to the residents. But I'm going to tell the residents exactly what happened in that fire committee meetings. You haven't got approval from the fire department to get rid of the dispatch. You're talking as though that's going to get done. You wouldn't talk about the fire department pay rates because, oh, we can't negotiate. We got the highest pay rates in all the state of Michigan. For the long term, we ought to be looking at somehow to deal with it. We're not. So you know what? Go ahead and make your little motion and make your motion to put that in front of the people and hold them hostage. Because instead of saying, this is what it takes to cover what we got, and this is what it would take to go to 30, and let the people decide, you're going to hold them hostage, and the first words out of your mouth is going to be, oh, if you don't approve this, we're not going to have a fire department. It's BS, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Linda Karczewski, resident. Well, I'm going to make a lot of people mad today. You know, a lot of people stood up here and said about the fire department, about the EMS. Let me tell you, if you had to call between EMS and MedStar, you want those guys. You want our EMS. If you ever had to have them come to your house, you want those experts. EMS, those MedStars are not experts. I will tell you, I drive your bus. I was in Grosse Pointe or Grosse Pointe Park, whatever, one of those Grosse Pointe Parks, when a lady fell on the bus, getting onto the bus. MedStar, they called MedStar because they don't have their own EMS there. When the gentleman came on the bus, the lady, her skin was so thin, it just broke right open on her leg. When they came on there, the gentleman, and I'm from MedStar, said, "Oh, this is beyond me." And I looked at him, I said, "Really?" And I said, "Do you have a pressurized bandage? Do you have an ACE bandage?" And I'm telling them, and this was my training that I got through CERT, that I knew what to do. Do you know that they wanted to carry her down, first they wanted her to walk down the stairs, and I said, "Really? She's gonna walk down the stairs? I don't think so." Then they were gonna carry her down the stairs, and I said, "I have a ramp. Put the ramp down, put your gurney on the ramp, bring it up, put her on it, and put her down." Now, this is a difference between MedStar and them. They would know the difference how to take care of her. You know, you talk about fires. Have you ever been to a fire and these guys go in there? Any of you guys gonna go in there? Any of you's gonna go into a burning building? No, there's training. You think they sit around all day? Why don't you go to the station, see what they do? Yes, I did go to the meetings. I didn't go to every single meeting that you had for the fire department. I went to some of them. If I wanna know what's going on in the fire department, I go to the fire department. And if you remember years ago, I did complain about certain things at the fire department. I went to the fire department. I brought them ideas. And they changed a lot of things at the fire department from some of the ideas I had. But if I want something, I'll go there and I'll talk to them. Maybe that's what is some of these people, if you talk to them instead of yelling at them, and if you have certain ideas, maybe if you talk to these fire department, they'll talk with you back. Don't scream at them. Talk with them. And as far as the police department, I know my time's up. Plus, the police department, yeah, we pay what, for 3? I have had them where the lady across the street, she is a nuisance. But I'll tell you, when she called them, 4 of them showed up, even though it was a nuisance. We only pay for 3. Now, 4 of them came, not knowing when she made this call, but there was 4 other ones someplace else in the township at the same time. So he does cover everything. But I'll tell you, I'll take these guys any days over MedStar.
Thank you.
My name is John Swadesh. I'm a resident citizen, and I was also one of the members of the committee, which I was proud to serve on. And my background is not fire, didn't know anything about the fire department beforehand, but my background is management, administration, budgets, balancing budgets. And I was honored to serve on this committee. I took the initial approach is, first off, the task was to balance the current budget without endangering public safety. That was the thing I kept in mind when I attended all these meetings. And there were a lot of meetings over 6 months. And I heard someone say that he went to all those meetings. No, he didn't go to all those meetings. No, I'm not. Legally, I'd like to take charge of that. You're lying. You're lying.
Hold on,
It's
guys.
my comment time. It's my comment time.
Hold on. Hey,
It's my
show some
comment
basic
time.
respect, Mr. Senstock. Nobody was talking during your time.
You object when they lie about you.
Mr. Senstock, I heard you say lies about me, and I respond to them in good time. I don't talk over someone else's time.
I attended all of the meetings, and at those meetings, I challenged considerably, particularly in the middle. I took a very analytical approach. I looked at each line item in the budget. And I even asked a lot of separate questions, challenging why certain things were done. I was concerned about certain things like why OPEB wasn't being paid. That's, to me, a serious issue, that there wasn't enough money in the budget to cover OPEB. I looked for fat. I looked for things that, where there could be reductions changed. And when I looked into the history of the expenditures, that I did find areas where there was a conservative approach into the expenditures. Now, there are, as was mentioned, that a large portion of the current budget is not adjustable because it's under contracts. Compared operations, we all compared operations to 10 communities in the region. And they were not out of line, and particularly because of the geographic location of Harrison Township makes it very difficult to operate any more efficiently than it is. We also looked into the cost of transport. We did look, and there was other incorrect comments made or suggestions or insinuations that we didn't look at other options. We looked at every other possible option of whether it would be volunteer force, modifications. We looked at every single option. Anybody who chose to come to the workshop that we had would know that all those options were looked at. I'll try to wrap up. I have a lot of other good things to say, but they looked at every other option. This was the most economic option. I support the proposal. The people should have the opportunity to vote. I ran out of time. I didn't think I would speak that, but Mr. Patante was a good member of a very good member of the committee. He and I did a lot of challenging. We didn't accept this concept of going for a millage increase. Eventually, we did because it is the right thing to do.
Thank you.
Matt Sauer, Harrison Township Firefighters, 1737. First, I want to say that I appreciate the comments by Trustee Batani and Chairman Verkest. They're both, the firefighters do support both of the things they had to say up here. Obviously, Kent was a little more long-winded, but it did get to the point. He mentioned the 30 personnel, and Bill hit the pretty much the nail on the head. With that being said, the firefighters support that rate at 6.35. I'd like to thank the fire service panel for all the hard work, especially Mr. Ray Riggs out of SEMCOG. For those that aren't familiar with SEMCOG, that's Southeastern Michigan Council of Governments. They came there, and along with his partner, Dave Berger, these two gentlemen work for the townships and cities, and they by no means are partial to firefighters or police departments or for any means the employees, if you want to call it that. They worked real hard on it, and I wanted to thank Mr. Ray Riggs from SEMCOG again, and also the fire chief. Actually, they put together a lot of work in that final draft that is available to all the residents here. Again, the local supports the fire panel's findings. It was a diverse group. It came from business, municipal experience, and fire service professionals. Mr. Swadesh that just spoke, he was, for a lack of better words, an anti when he came there. Mr. Batani, same way. They came in with the feelings of, let's go to MedStar. We need to have MedStar. That'll save money. And once they went through that, they found that there was no savings to be made. They found that us doing our own transport, our own fire-based EMS, and I believe Mr. Senstock was there for that meeting, actually helps offset the cost of the fire department. The one major thing that the firefighters are in favor of is the 30 personnel. The 30 personnel, what that does, it helps mitigate emergencies here in Harrison Township. On a day-to-day basis, maybe not today, but maybe the next 5 days in a row, we are not responding to runs, period. That's something that just isn't public knowledge. That's not something that we're proud of, and I would assume that the township officials wouldn't like to go run around saying how we couldn't respond to a fire run. The fire chief does a good job of shielding the public to the point of fault. Maybe he needs to bring it up more often and say that, look, there was a CPR that we sent a pickup truck on. That, hey, there was a fire that we showed up with 2 guys in an engine and stood outside and waited for Mount Clemens in Clinton Township. These things have gone on for years, and eventually we will pay the price. Maybe some people don't care about their belongings or their families. I can tell you that I do, and I think that most people do, and we need to make sure that we're doing that. One last thing that I would like to mention that, and I know we're running out of time, is there is no slush fund. That was brought up earlier in the day. There is zero slush fund in that budget. That $15,000 equipment budget, that's already spent. We have $40,000 at a minimum due for gear. 40,000. We're actually having to tell people, no, I can't get gear right now because these other 5 people are in front of you. There's guidelines that go about that. The public doesn't know about it, the chief shields it, and maybe you should ask your expert. The fire chief's here tonight, and I think he can give you a laundry list of things that need to be done and tell you that that 6.35 is very conservative and very fair for the residents. Thank you, Board.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Andy Hood, current president of the Firefighters Association. Just a few brief comments. A gentleman had asked about fatal fires in the community. I have almost 20 years on in the service of the community. I can recall off the top of my head at least 7 fatal fires. People died in structures, 1 in a vehicle. I believe you live on Huron Point, is that correct, sir? Personally, I've been on fires on Circle Drive, Lakeshore Drive, Riverdale. Helped pull a kid out of a burning car wreck on Circle Drive. So while most people don't see these things, they happen on a daily basis. Car accidents, who would think we'd get a car accident on Lakeshore Drive, but here we go. A car runs through someone's subdivision or runs through their shrubbery, blows through their camper, and we're extricating a guy on Lakeshore Drive. It happens. Firefighters Union, we fully support the recommendation of the fire panel. We believe with this millage rate, we can get the implementation done, and we'll give you the commitment. I promise you we'll work through and get the dispatch part taken care of as well. Not a problem, it'll happen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that was gonna be my question. while I had you up there, I was gonna put you on the spot.
Right.
About the dispatch.
And
You beat me to it.
Yep, and I'd like to address that, actually.
Happy to do it.
Yeah.
We believe in the fire committee's recommendation, and we'll work with the
fine.
township
Should add
for
some
full
fun.
implementation. Done.
Sounds good, thank you.
Nice.
Seeing no other public comment, we'll close the floor for public comment, and move back to board comment. I took notes, I'll do the best I can to answer some of the questions and respond to some of the comments.
Oh, it's 11:30, so.
There was a comment made that there's an increase of $250,000 to the police. No, the difference between the current and the new is probably $10,000, $20,000, $30,000, something like that. So I don't know where that came from, but there is not an increase. The statement was made that there's 27 men and 12 are firefighters, also not the case. There was a time when there were 27 firefighters total, but of that group, there were 12 officers and 15 firefighters. During the last round of negotiations, which ultimately led to arbitration, we were able to lower that to a maximum of 9 officers. So if we were at 27 personnel, that would be 18 firefighters with 9 officers. But it's important to say that if we're at a staff of 27, all 27 of those are trained as firefighters and EMS personnel. So within our department, we don't have rig staffing, we don't have certain people assigned to certain tasks. All 27 of those firefighters are firefighters and they're EMS personnel. Some of them have additional training beyond that, such as dive team and other expertise. I know there was a discussion saying, well, the actual number is greater. I understand better what the resident meant, saying that the deficit is greater than 98. And I guess on one hand, I'll agree, and one hand, I'll disagree. For the last 4 years, we haven't had the luxury to fund for equipment. It's true we bought an ambulance and spent, if I remember, about $175,000 on an ambulance. It was a purchase we had to make and decided that it was a responsible thing to do. But we haven't been setting aside money. We took that from the savings. And we haven't been investing in the OPEB, even though we're promising benefits. So when we look at prior deficits, those deficits were greater. and we're not funding for pension and equipment. That may have been a misstatement. We are funding for pension. We're not funding, when we say OPEB, it's other post-employment benefits, which is typically retiree health care. So we are funding for pension, but I think it may have just been a misstatement. Other communities have the same department with half the cost. That was what we utilized SEMCOG for. That was one of the questions we wanted to see. I don't know who it was that made reference to 10 communities, but we saw that comparison so we could see how we stack up. We didn't find another community that had the same size department at half the cost. Now, it's important to understand that there are some communities that are experiencing growth in their taxable value, and because of that, their millage rate may not be the same as our millage rate. There are also communities that have less growth than us or are experiencing greater problems, and their millage rate to provide a similar level of service may be greater. But when we talk about the actual dollars, it's a function of millage rate times taxable value. The dollars seem to be pretty comparable, but there are certainly some communities that have a higher millage rate or a lower millage rate based on their taxable value. Police are in the cars 24 hours. It's true, but we pay for 10 police officers so that we have 2 full-time or on-the-road police officers. Right now, we have anywhere from 8 to 9 firefighters that are on duty. So our police and our fire services aren't readily comparable, and they do serve a different function. And for certain, again, as I mentioned, because of the geographic challenges of the township, it's not comparable to say, I'll provide police and fire services in Clinton Township, Harrison Township, and perhaps Washington Township and come out with the same thing. I don't disagree, at least in form, with the concept of an a la carte type millage. I respect that option. The problem is what we've seen when we've looked at other communities is it becomes confusing to a lot of the voters to be able to say, well, I'm going to choose this level, or that level. Recently, I believe probably, if I had to guess, maybe in 2010, I think St. Clair Shores had a similar question where their government put a question on and the fire union put a question on. There was a comment made that we didn't discuss clerical staff. I would disagree with that. I don't remember ever saying maybe we'll get rid of that person. That was stated. What we did talk about is how are other communities staffed. How normal or abnormal is having a fire chief, a clerical person, and no 40-hour person. What we found was the clerical person was pretty typical, and that was discussed. What we also found was that not having at least another 40-hour person to assist with some of the training or some of the EMS duties was unique to Harrison Township. Most of our peers did have a 40-hour person that would assist with some of those duties. Sometime in the past, firefighters at the time negotiated that position away and agreed to take additional pay to do that. No one was there from MedStar. It's true. What we talked about when we talked about transport was that at best, when we look at our peers that have 360 degrees of neighbors, those peers don't pay anything to have an ambulance in place. Several of the experts, if you will, suggested that you'll likely pay an additional fee to MedStar in order to have them present, but our analysis of transport wasn't based on that additional fee. We said there's a likelihood that there'd be additional fee, but even if there was no fee, the loss in revenue compared to the staffing wouldn't make it break even or save us money. It's true that Mr. Senstock did attend some of those meetings. I can't sit here and tell you whether he attended all of them or not. I really didn't take attendance. What I do know is, as well, as he pointed out, he wasn't a member of the committee. We allowed him to participate, ask questions. There was definitely open communication. At no point was any member of the public in attendance refused the ability to ask or comment. So he certainly wasn't silenced, but it's true that you weren't appointed to the committee. There was a comment made saying that we don't have approval from the firefighters. I can say that I've had several conversations, including probably meeting for an hour or more as recently as last Friday with representatives of the fire union discussing the potential agreement of what we might agree to commit to and what the firefighters would agree to commit to. I believe it's certainly an achievable agreement, and I haven't found in those conversations a resistance to any of the things. And in fact, there were some things that the firefighters offered in those discussions that were above and beyond merely giving up dispatch. Someone says our firefighters are paid the highest rates in Michigan. Again, we learned that that simply wasn't true when we went through a comparison of 10 communities, not all of Michigan. So I know that we exceeded just a pool of 10 people or 10 communities and found that some were paid higher. I can't tell you how it compares to Michigan, but I certainly know there are other communities that pay a greater rate. There was a discussion one resident had about EMS and MedStar and the level of service. And while I certainly agree, again, one of the things that I should say, I agree that the level of service that our residents get exceeds that of the level of service that residents of other communities get that don't have their own dedicated EMS. I think it's also important to point out, one of the things that we learned, and I think one of the things that was very persuasive, was that our neighboring communities, when they don't provide transport, they still show up, for example, with an engine. And some people say, well, why are you showing up? I'm having a heart attack and you got a fire truck there. And it isn't necessarily always the most efficient means of transportation. But it's staffed to be able to provide advanced life support. They begin that advanced life support, MedStar shows up, the firefighters, often one or two of them, ride in the ambulance back to the hospital. And now, another firefighter has to leave the station to go to the hospital to retrieve the firefighter. So you've not only taken that firefighter out of commission, or possibly two, now you took another guy out of commission to go pick him up from the hospital, and you don't get a dime. But you certainly had firefighting personnel